Yes, I guess so. Excellent. First of all, I have to say thank you so much, Ben and Barbara, for having us. Having all these people here and being the last person in line means I think I almost really want to totally, completely revise everything I wanted to say and respond to what everyone's saying. I also want to say this is one of the coolest, smoothest IT presentations I've ever been to for the technical staff and the quality of presentations. Now watch me blow it, okay? All right. I also realize I am pretty much the last speaker, and therefore I'm the last thing between you and your liberty. And oh God, I feel as if I've gone on too long already. So I have a question for you. How many of you have been to Pompeii? Great. How many have been to Herculaneum? How many of you have been to Stabia? Come on, you have. Okay. That's gotta change. Stabia is not like Pompeii or Herculaneum. It is the largest concentration of well-preserved, enormous Roman seaside villas in the entire Mediterranean. It is only 4 kilometers from Pompeii. It was buried in the same eruption of the 24th of August or 23rd of November, whichever date you prefer, AD 79. It was excavated up at the time of the opening of first excavations at Herculaneum and Pompeii, starting in 1749, by tunnels excavated under the light cap of the volcanic last pyroclastic surge, tunnels going through the wall, which when excavators got bored, they would just punch a hole and go right through the wall. So they got obviously in the kitchen and didn't find any frescoes, so they punched a hole there. And it's a beginning actually of scientific archaeology in that they removed at least the vignettes of the frescoes and took them to the museums and the palaces at Portici in Napoli. We have a different word for that nowadays. It's called stealing. But an extraordinary good plan was done, but then the site was buried and totally forgotten. The plan was published in 1881, by which time nobody knew where the site was. It was rediscovered by a local passionate high school principal who began the excavation with his own pocket money, a janitor, and an out-of-work car mechanic. And gradually, the excavation passed to the Superintendency of Archaeology of Pompeii. The result is that when you look at the site today, all the little red blotches are what has once again opened up a second time since 1950, and the site is visitable. All the yellow stuff is stuff that is still underground, seen briefly in the 18th century, and all the stuff in between has never been touched. The site is, therefore, a series of enormous villas up to 22,000 square meters built directly next to one another along a sea cliff, most of which has yet even to be excavated. Okay. The importance of Stabia is that it is probably the best place where archaeology can recover the powerful communities of Roman villas, the senatorial so-called Villae Maritimi around the Bay of Baiae on the north side of Naples. In the 1st century BC and AD, some of the most important events of the late Roman Republic and early Empire occurred in the villas of the Bay of Naples, not just in Rome. When Octavian learned in April 44 that, what? That he was the heir of Julius Caesar, who had been killed at the Ides of the previous month, right? He didn't go to Rome first. He went to Brindisi, picked up an army and a treasury, and then went to the Bay of Naples. It is therefore only at Stabia, however, only at Stabia are these villas well enough preserved where archaeology can recover the entire three-dimensional context of these villas. Only at Stabia can you stand in a frescoed dining room, a triclinium, and look out to the Bay of Naples and feel the cooling breezes and the carefully calculated shade and environment created by virtuoso architects and artists of the 1st century BC. And that's what justifies this project. This is a project to create a so-called archaeological park, which is a term very much bandied about, very much misbandied about in many ways, on this particular site, for which we, in 1998 to 2000, created a new type of foundation in Italy, the so-called Restoring Ancient Stabia Foundation. Note the word restoring. There will be some large excavations, but the point is to conserve. It is a new type of foundation, which is a nonprofit, the first created under 1998 law in Italy, which can both receive and spend state and private funds, both from Italy and outside of Italy. It is consisted of a 3-institution, 3-person board, the Superintendency Pompeii, government, a local group led by a local notary who has deep pockets and a lot of passion and an awful lot of friends, So we are deeply embedded in the Italian community and the American University, University of Maryland, where I'm a research associate. I am the so-called coordinator general working under that and under that board. And even as the title, it sounds like it was straight from Gilbert and Sullivan. What it means is I am actually the chief single organizing officer for archaeology, master planning, and academic programs. I also have a full-time job and, of course, lots of spare time. So it is the type of foundation created to create sustainability and long-term sustainability of a semi-profit on a site, which will continue to manage the site even after excavation and preliminary conservation is terminated. So the idea is actually, as we work it out very slowly, legally and diplomatically, that the superintendency will in large part leave it to us to manage even the tourist and educational outreach on the site. We become, in effect, an operative arm of the Italian government operating an Italian-owned cultural property. Now, what I really want to talk to you about is a little bit about the archaeology, simply because it's fun. But then I think I really want to talk about the second point, the structure of the organization and how that meshes with the SCI-Arc mission and how bonding with SCI-Arc radically improves and advances our innovative mission in archaeology and may create some new models for overall archaeological management. Okay, I'm going to start off. One of the first things that we did when we took over activity on the site is doing geophysical survey on the site. And we found out, in fact, that one of the villas was much bigger than we thought it was. We thought this villa here, the so-called Villa San Marco, ended right here. And instead, geophysical survey done by Meg Waters, using magnetometry, resistivity, and GPR, using all three methods, discovered it didn't. It ends over here somewhere. So, actually, you know what we've just seen? I think we've seen the demise of the laser pointer. This huge peristyle had spectacular ceiling frescoes which were conserved and found during the 1960s excavation. It was hit by the earthquake of 1980, and the spirally stuccoed columns all collapsed. They're totally gone. What we discovered, however, is that when we found that corner column, the peristyle was not 35 meters long, but is 118 meters long. And all of that peristyle there is undisturbed. There's an entire layer of ceiling frescoes carefully preserved under undisturbed excavation. The 18th century excavations didn't touch this area. We did actually, I know, you hear somebody from Pompeii, everybody wants to see the skeletons. Okay, that's my skeleton. It turns out, yeah, they always want to see the skellies. It turns out this person actually didn't die in the eruption. Do you know who did die in the eruption at Stabia? Pliny the Elder. That's where he finished up and died on the beach of the morning of the next day at about 8 a.m. This guy came along about a century later and was actually robbing the place, and the roof fell in on him. So he basically got what he deserved. Another excavation to re-clear what had been cleared in the 18th century, the original entrance courtyard to the so-called Villa San Marco. That's the same area. This is the 18th century plan. Pretty good. All of this was buried. So this is what it looked like when this excavation began. The excavation was planned by us. We got the 4.5 million euros from EU funds. We couldn't spend it yet because we didn't have the legal structure yet to spend it. So the superintendency did the excavation and did a damn good job of it as well, too. So that's what it looked like in March 2008. That's what it looked like in June 2008. And that's what it looked like in October 2008 with reconstruction back in place. A big fat cast where a plane tree root was found. And actually, we know it's a plane tree because the leaf pattern was actually found on a bit of ash. So Pompeian archaeology is very unusual. And at the other end of the courtyard, there's the door to the street looking into the town. This villa is built right up against the last street of the town. And even the gatekeepers, the Ostiares' little cabin with the half-timbering was preserved. The half-timbering is obviously modern. So I'm not going to go into interpretations of that. On the other side of the same street, there's that courtyard. Boink, zap, is an excavation which they did on the edge of the first townhouse. Okay, this is fun. This is a first sketch I did in 1999, and this was an idea which is both archaeological and master planning. This is the idea, and this is people movement on site, to drop the level down to the level of the ancient street, find the ancient street, and go in the front door of the original front door of the villa. So both archaeology and site master planning involved this. This is what the superintendency excavation looked like, clearing the front of the first townhouse and the former city gate going down to the water. The Villa San Marcos on the right, this other townhouse is to the left, and the port presumably is right to my back. It's a colonnade, winged, which apparently had 2 different heights of columns, very beautiful. And the interesting thing is, it's symmetrical, almost certainly. That's all reconstructed beyond here, obviously. But it fits in the city block, so it's apparently a spectacular dining room with 4 cross-axial views, even looking to its own courtyard. So this is interesting, because this shows that here at Stabia, the situation is the same as that at Herculaneum Pompeii. With the arrival of Augustus in about 30 BC, the end of the civil wars, the city wall goes out of use, and wealthy mansions with sea views are built on the edge. So the same thing happens at Stabia, Pompeii, and Herculaneum. Okay. Another thing about this is the 2 gateways face each other across the 2 streets. There seems to be a passage between the 2 over this arch, and therefore it's very possible these are in fact 2 conjoined properties. That's kind of interesting. I mean, it's really interesting. Some very powerful person owns a huge townhouse and an even more enormous villa right next door. And the interesting thing too about it is there's also, whoops, didn't mean to do that. Well, that's all right, I'll do fine. There's actually a bath with a view in the corner there. Move to the next large villa, the so-called Villa of Ariana, that's the Italian for Ariadna, in which it's a main conventional villa with a peristyle and an atrium, and the cliff is out here, an enormous cliff, and large amounts of it long since collapsed, and a huge garden. The Russians, from the Hermitage State Museums in St. Petersburg, have become our partners since we sent an exhibit there in 2008. And in 2010, they brought an excavation team, and they brought jewelry. They brought a conservation team. A conservation team which the Italian conservators really love. Here you have, incidentally, Alexander Buchagin from the Hermitage wing of the archaeological wing of the State Museums. And what he's come across there is actually an 18th century excavation hole. You know, one of those holes they punch through the wall. And that's the stratigraphy of their trench right there. So that's the archaeology of archaeology in a sense. It's a beautiful, precious, excellently preserved piece of architecture. And this is where you get into, of course, what one of the major things we on this site have to do. We have to record it in 3 dimensions and great details and interpret it in a reliable sort of way. This is the first way we're going about doing it. And this is a method which I developed quite a long time ago, early 90s actually, when I don't think many people, if anyone, was doing quite this way, to use software from surveying commands in ways that was not intended to be used originally. In other words, use the line commands to create 3-dimensional wireframe drawings. This is what we're producing in that same courtyard. It has certain advantages. And it's very interesting that Carlo Bianchini and Brian Matthews brought up certain issues about the relationship between drawing and LiDAR scanning. There are certain advantages to having a person on site, I'm convinced still. I was perfectly prepared to have all of this technology be thrown out by LiDAR modeling. As an architectural historian, my experience is, or knowledge is generally that in architectural design recording, new technologies of design and drawing don't often replace the old. They synthesize. Drawing like this has a certain advantage in that a drawing has a decisive quality of the person directly in front of the object. LiDAR doesn't have that. LiDAR has the advantage of being more objective. It's not as prejudiced in that sense. But the thing I've seen with LiDAR, you can now go back, like Bianchini and others, and redraw as if you're there. What I'm very excited about, some of the technology here, is I can see the possibility of taking your pad back in the seal and doing the exact thing now, someone drawing in front of the object. One of the big problems here is sustainability of a team. How do I get people who can actually manage this kind of software and complexity in the post-processing within my own team year by year? One of the most exciting things I've seen is the democratization of technology, where this is now being passed to a point where it's as easy as SketchUp. I can do SketchUp. I'm not a very good CAD person. I teach the surveying and all that. This is something that will, I think we're on the brink of a very major change. Also, one other point I want to make to all of you technology wonks here, you buffins, have you noticed that in really high-level research projects, they tend to work with old software? The reason is once you enter upon a high technology research project, you can't afford to change the software. Similarly, we're in that position. Once we settle on something, we can't afford to change the software every 2 years. At the moment, I think we, in RIS Foundation, are a very fortunate point. I'm at a very fortunate point being here with all the people you brought together, that I think there's a point that we haven't yet made the leap to what we do with LiDAR scanning combined with drawing. And I see in the next year or so something very interesting. Also, the potential I've interested too here that Paul Turnbull brought about, and others, that our foundation is permanent, and we are going to start an advanced field school with my college, Southwestern University, a small liberal arts college, and the University of Maryland School of Architecture, where we could begin to develop a sustainable model where a curriculum actually provides the technology in both GIS and three-dimensional scanning. So these are some of the images you can, from our own, that is the Southwestern and Ross and University of Maryland, produce conventional plans. But even now the plans are just a little bit further away from the primary data, which is something I, as an archaeologist, am very concerned about. The plans are very beautiful. They have little squiggly lines in them, which has convinced me they're actually based on the real data. And we even patch in, say, a LiDAR scan of an enormous surface. Or this arcuated structure here is something which one of my students, a fairly beginning student here, turned into SketchUp and did a kind of a simple modeling job on, with the great garden surface beyond there. Okay? And they do the normal kind of patchwork sort of thing, which is a simpler version of what often happens with the fully developed SciArc product plans, projecting drawings and so forth back and photographs back onto the wall, controlled by the three-dimensionality. These are SciArc's first scans, which they did on a small part of an enormous villa this last summer. I'm also very pleased the speed which relationships between us and SciArc have developed, because I visited San Francisco, I think just a year ago today, for the first time in Oakland. And we've already had people on site, and we're already working in direction of this. Frankly, being in academe, it's great getting out of academe with the speed that can sometimes happen when you're dealing more with people who are interested in industry. It's really important. This is the principal scans and ECOLA. Brian's just given me this. Not yet a completely rendered model as yet. Very high level resolution, obviously. It's really thrilling to go through this. I mean, we've seen lots of these today, but it's my site, so I got to look. Actually, this is the first time seeing the whole thing. We're all brinksmanship masters here in this case. Some of it colored. This cubiculum, this is the same little courtyard the Russians are working on, is amazing. Okay. Now, to give you another idea of the scope, a totally different excavation which this project had to deal with. An enormous garden, huge. This is the way it looked back in 2007 when I first arrived on site.
So we decided it's not.
Just checking to see who's in the room, but I'll have to tell you frankly, that was a total surprise to me. I arrived with a team, several teams, prepared to do one thing, and somebody had gotten a little bit over-enthusiastic and was taking the excavation all the way down to garden surface. And that's what it looked like by the end of the year and the next year. This was breathtaking and shocking. Without planning, somebody had cleared the, I won't say who, cleared the entire garden surface from one end to the other, a distance of 108 meters, and this level of preservation of this garden surface is staggering. My point here is, first of all, this had to be done rapidly, with no budget in my hands, and eventually, with this point, a crucial thing about archaeology is the era of the single-funded, single-institution excavation is over, for the most part. What we have to do is do a patchwork of excavation. So I'm mainly really talking about administration here. So I'm a policy wonk here as much as an archaeologist. I took a personal direction, so I became the director. I'm the coordinator of all the excavations, including those by people like Columbia and Hermitage, whatever. So I took personal collection of that and put together, I forget how many, 10 or 12 teams from at least 7 different countries with very little budget. The staggering level of preservation, those are garden beds that are as well preserved as they were on noon on the 24th of August, AD 79. And the clean lapilli is coming off very quickly and easily. The first thing we did, as soon as I got money from the Ebert Foundation, was to LiDAR scan it with people from Birmingham. And the result is, we have preserved that surface. It's a classic SciArc mission kind of thing that we did. That surface is now gone. It's been eroded by 5 or so winters, but we have quite precisely the digital recording of that surface, and that's what we're publishing within a matter of months or so. So that's one of our first things. This is Google Earth comes back again. Imagine how much change. That, you can see clearly the pattern of the garden. Two wide beds, 3 narrow ones, little white spots, which are tree root cavities filled with white lapilli. They're all laid out on a nice grid. Okay, I'm going to go through very rapidly. So that's the pattern of the whole garden. 2 broad beds, 3 narrow, 2 broad. So the narrow ones have trees laid out on a grid. The broad ones have irregular little plants and bushes in them. That's intriguing. Another thing, too, is that by another type of testing, we found out that the garden bed surface was grass because of phytoliths. What are phytoliths? I did not know what phytoliths are. The little deposits of minerals that grow inside of plants or build up around the shells of bugs. Bugs of different species live at different altitudes on different plants. The bugs that were living there, presumed by the little limey phytolith shells, lived on grass. What's that mean? That means the walkways between the beds were lawns. The Romans had lawns. So, didn't know that before. That's a phytolith. Okay, thank you. That means Romans were walking on lawns between these rows of trees and these wild gardens. The trees are lined up in neat little rows, but the interesting thing is they're all different species because we have the root cavities. We don't know the species that well because trees are kind of fussy. They change the root shapes depending how you water them. But that's paralleled somewhere else in the much later Temple of Heliogabalus in the Palatine, where the trees seem to be a collection of different species. So we have this amazing elite garden, and we don't know who owned it. It could have been a senator, it could have been a local, very wealthy municipal person. But it's as if the trees become kind of a gazetteer of empire, a collection, in a so-called private garden. But in Roman culture, nobody at that level was private. Their houses were not private. They were on display. Okay, you have to empty them. To put casts in them, put them back. They are big holes. Takes a lot of digging. And the little bushes in the other beds have very complicated holes. So I mean, just notice the range of technology you need in archaeology. That was hard to find. That was one of our best tools. We had to go to soda fountains to get those. However, then we had another idea. Okay, fine, that's a lot easier when you have nothing but lapilli. That too had its disadvantages. So we went through a lot of vacuum cleaners. Poor Mikhail. But it worked. And then we cast all these, which took a hell of a lot of casting. But there's a disadvantage. The plaster casts, once they're in the ground, you can't see the root shape. We're not yet at the point where there is a GPR that can detect the root shape underground without digging up the root and destroying the stratigraphy. As far as I know, that does not yet exist. But that's what we need to do. But so you can draw it, okay, fine. But we developed another method, developed by Kathy Gleason and Cotell, by using this gooey stuff, a type of silicone, given I blush to admit, called dragon skin. Okay, archaeologists have no pride, all right? It's a silicone used to make horror masks in Hollywood. And you pour it in, and it settles. It has its disadvantages too, okay? And then you pull it out of the ground. The audio up?
Not exactly preserving this from destruction.
Oh my God.
Okay. Look at this. I feel like we're in a Star Wars movie.
Sorry. That's what makes me
It's so creepy.
Okay. Now after that, I'm sure none of us are going to take it seriously, that horrible blow to feminism and archaeology. But she invented this amazing set of casts. Look at that. Those are hair roots. That hole preserved the shape of the hair roots since the 24th of August, AD 79 until 2009. I mean, I can't get used to it. I cannot get used to Pompeian archaeology. For those of you who are real British archaeologists, I have dug Britain. No further comment. Okay. Then the analysis of this, it's very interesting because the beds don't look as if they have a type of planar composition until you look at them this way. But Kathy Gleason related this, from Cornell, did this really brilliant analysis that suddenly this kind of bed of irregular plantings looks like a kind of planting of a type of fresco known from very few frescoes, which so far has no known equivalent in archaeology. That is this fictive thicket, a wild garden. What she pointed out is that actually, it looks as these are actually constructed in planes, which she's done this way in plan. And that's what we see in plan. The most famous of this, of course, is this. The Villa of Livia at Prima Porta. So this is a type of fresco that purported to represent a garden which on the whole, until 2009, or 10, everybody thought was totally made up by the painter. That's not true. Catherine Stackelberg said, this does not exist in archaeology. Well, now we have it. So that's kind of the things that we've been doing. Interesting thing too, now, this garden is shown where the gardener is shaping space. The word topiarios comes into use in Latin. It means a gardener. The profession of landscape gardening may then have been developed, therefore, in the decades after 30 BC, 79 AD. Shaping space with cross-axial views, just as architects were doing at the same time on the same site and all over the Roman Empire. At the same time, poetry and painting was developing a sensibility for the panorama and landscape. So these spectacular architecture that occurs in the Villa Ariana and the Villa San Marco Stabia is a fascinating and very significant, compelling ensemble. This is the first LiDAR scan we did back in 2007 with the University of Birmingham. Again, the problem was, of course, we couldn't go further with that, they couldn't go further with that. So it's an isolated project that didn't go anywhere. And that's one of the things we have to kind of deal with. You know, where do we go institutionally? So ask this simple question: why excavate Stabia? At Pompeii, there's a general agreement that there's more than can be conserved. There's no point in digging further. There's agreed moratorium on new excavations. And the reason, of course, then again, is that Stabia is a radically different type of site. It's the only place in the whole area at the moment where new excavations are generally being planned and permitted. So you've just seen several enormous new excavations. That justifies an archaeological park on the site. But to make the site useful and conservable, you need urbanistic interventions, like a funicular to the public transport, or connections with other types of sites and areas, so you have a circuit of archaeological sites. Or you make that site visible from a distance. If you've ever been to Naples area, it's very disorienting. But a low of pine trees on the edge of the hill would make the place visible from Pompeii. Or night lighting. It's therefore a project which goes way beyond archaeology and conservation, creating a new type of visit on a new type of site. We've already built and designed the beginnings of a building, which to my utter horror, actually for a while I had to be the architect, even though I'm not a licensed architect, but we eventually got somebody else to finish off. The superintendency has put up new roofs on the site. We, at the foundation, had the first long-term loan of antiquities from the United States to Italy based upon a 2002 Memorandum of Understanding. And went to all these museums. Another version went also to the Hermitage State Museums in St. Petersburg and to Hong Kong. And we have, therefore, the ability to exhibit works, and we have the ability to request long-term loans of antiquities from Italy to museums and institutions in the United States which support archaeology in Italy. And if you don't believe that remark, there it is right there in the 2006 memorandum, and there's the 2002 memorandum itself, just to bring along for proof. And the whole point of this is, of course, is to stem the flow of illicit antiquities, at least to American museums. What this does is leads to a potential fundraising structure, again talking about sustainability, whereby American donors, who are almost always local in their approach, can give to the local museum can support research on the site, and they in turn can learn long-term loans. And the local American museums are changing their attitudes. I have had museum directors say to me, we no longer need to own these objects anymore. They can now have 5, maybe 10, maybe even 20-year loans if they support archaeology in Italy. And as you know, as in everywhere, there's more in the basement than there is in the gallery in Italy. So this changes the ability for us as archaeologists, foreign archaeologists in Italy, and most of us are actually Italian, not just to come, excavate, we hope publish, and then leave the mess to the superintendency. We stay and we keep the site running and keep the site preserved. We also have now an institute with 90 rooms and a view to die for. It's teeming with 60 or more groups from Russia, Brazil, America, all over the place. It's a great place to have Roman food or listen to Roman music, if you like Roman music. I happen not to hear the reconstructions I've heard, but the instruments are fantastic. We are a legal organization in the US and in Italy. And therefore, what this foundation is doing is creating a type of structure which will last long term. And therefore, is that my slide I want to go? Yeah. This is my point, therefore, where the synergy between SCI-Arc and SCI-Arc type of organizations and Ross and Ross-type organizations, if there are some, and some are doing it, is that on one hand, new archaeology needs a kind of two types of foundations to coordinate lots of little projects. On the one hand, it needs organizations of high technology, like SCI-Arc, which go to numerous different sites. So when Scott Lee arrives at Stabia, he doesn't know his Latin, and he has no idea the difference between Lucius Calpurnius Piso Caesonis and Lucius Calpurnius Piso Frugi. But he knows his LiDAR. And also he knows how to drink red wine and eat really good food. I, on the other hand, well, I know sort of how LiDARs work, but I wouldn't try. As a long-term organization, we're there to coordinate groups that come and go, assuring coherent long-term effect. Sustainability. I'm really interested in what Paul Turnbull is saying in terms of the way what he's done with, my God, high school students, which is a model I think I'm going to adapt for my undergraduates and the Ross Foundation and Maryland, where we can integrate certain types of courses in our undergraduate curriculum that do the duty of training them the way they should in GIS and other things, but that suddenly becomes a long-term crucial resource for a very complicated, long-term, large and ambitious project like ours. So I think we found a couple of very crucial keys to sustainability. Some of the new technology I've seen here is some of the key to sustainability. How that meshes with administration is very important. I want to leave you with one final image. We've seen a lot of this sort of stuff before, today and yesterday. I have heard that 80% of the frescoes that were visible in Pompeii and Herculaneum in the 1920s and 30s no longer exist. They're just gone. They've bleached, they've been stolen, they've spalled off the walls, they've been destroyed by salts. Stop and think about it. What would it like to be a scholar of Pompeii today if we had SCI-Arc in 1920? Thanks so much for sending people to our site. Do come and visit. Thanks much.